Hello again. So this video is a little different because we're going to talk about manga still. Obviously, by the title, you'll know we're talking about Death Note. We're going to talk about the Death Note, I guess, itself. The Death Note, like, okay, no introduction to Death Note. I don't think it needs one. If you are an anime fan, you probably heard of Death Note. If you're not an anime fan, you've heard of Death Note probably. Quick summary about a kid who finds a Death Note. Death Note is essentially a notebook that if you write someone's name on it, as long as you know what they look like, they die. You can put the time of death. There's a lot of rules to it. What's important is I'm actually a fan of Death Note. A lot of people who watch anime do respect it, whether you're a fan or not. You know, it changes. A lot of people like the first half of Death Note. They don't really like the second half as much. Me personally, I like all of it. I think there's a lot of good in all of it. I'm going to talk about Death Note today, but I did want to show this off. I like to flex. I have the box set of Death Note. So I have the complete box set. It comes with the first 12 volumes, including the How to Read, this is volume 13, as well as the How to Use It booklet, which is pretty dope. What doesn't come with are the side stories. So I wish it did. I wish it came with like the BB Myrtle Cave stuff. I wish it came with like a Day in the Life of L stuff. I wish it came with like the C Kira and A Kira stuff. But we're going to talk about those for a minute. So I don't know what it is with Early the Death Note that makes it so interesting. But all these Death Note stories are interesting, and even like the C Kira, A Kira, and what's his name? Is it Toro? Let me double check. I think it's yeah, Taro Kagami. These are all very interesting stories. These are other people who had the Death Note. It's not necessarily canon. I think the C and A Kira stuff might be canon, but I don't know if Toro's story is canon. But C and A Kira stuff, I believe, is canon. They take place after the story of Death Note, after Light loses at the end to Nier, and the C Kira stuff is a nameless Kira, I believe, who just kind of starts killing the elderly people. He's basically specifically goes after old people who want to die, and he ends up fumbling that because the thing was Nier is Nier notices that this Kira is not attempting to be righteous like Light. We'll get to Light in a minute, but we're talking about C Kira right now. Um, and this fact that he's only killing elderly people who want to die, and he's essentially saying that like it's not really a case I'm interested in. He's not going to kill me anyway. I'm not old. Um, this all leads with L make an announcement after C Kira goes on a mass murder spree, killing a bunch of young people on TV who say they also want to die. Please, Kira, kill me. I didn't want to be alive. Stuff like that. Because he goes on that killing spree, um, L makes a well near is L for the for the reference of the rest of this mostly because Near takes his place after Light's defeat, but Eldon goes online, Near in this case, I'll just say Near. Near goes online and he says basically, like, hey, you're a criminal. I'm not following this case. It's not worth my time. The real Kira was interesting. You're not. By doing this, Kira's not getting the same recognition as he wanted from the previous Kira. Ends up killing himself because of it. It's also hinted in some stuff later we'll talk about as to another reason what could have possibly led to him killing himself after the mass murdering of those children. But that's just kind of one of the things that happens. Then we get into Akira. Now, Akira is one of the more interesting ones. I actually like the story a lot. Akira follows, what's his name? Minoru Tanaka. Taka? Yeah, Tanaka, I was right. So it follows him. He essentially, the story starts with um, the ending of Sekira. Because Sekira's ending ends with the Shinigami that gave Sekira the Death Note, going back to the Shinigami realm and talking to Ryuk because Ryuk's not the one that gave him the notebook in that story. He talked to Ryuk and he's like, "Yeah, man, it's boring." And Ryuk's just like, "Yeah, man, you got to do better, man. You should have picked a better human, man." Speaking of which, I gotta go and get more apples, and he leaves. And that's where Akira picks up. They call him Akira. A stands for auction in this case. The C and C Kira stands for what is it called? I think it was Cheap Kira or something like cheap. Yeah, Cheap Kira. But A Kira or Auction Kira is for this kid Minoru. He finds a Death Note one day while he's in school, and he's like, once he learns how the Death Note works and everything, he basically looks at Ryuk and he's just like, give me a minute to think. He asks a couple of questions, talking about like, okay, well, I'm supposed to be possessed by Shinigami. How far is it that you need to possess me from? Like, what's the maximum distance? He asks a bunch of these questions, and eventually he says, all right, take your notebook back. bring it back to me in 2 years. By relinquishing control, he loses all his memories. So at the end of the cheap Kira arc, we go into auction Kira, in which Ryuk goes back. It's been that 2 year time skip. He goes back up to Minoru. He taps him with the Death Note. He gets his memories back. And Minoru's like, "Oh, I see. Okay." And Ryuk's like, "Yeah, man, I haven't had apples in 2 years. That's an issue." So Minoru then decides, "Okay, I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm essentially going to sell the Death Note." And so Minoru does this. He puts it up for auction without putting it up for auction because he kind of just he has Ryuk, using the fact that Ryuk can be anywhere within, I think it's 14 kilometers. He has Ryuk go and like put messages up on Sakura TV, and he's just like, "Hey, uh, we're selling the Death Note. If you want to buy it, drop the amount of USD you want to pay me on Twitter using these hashtags." And Twitter's getting flooded. So he's going to school. He's listening to the numbers rise, and eventually it goes to the task force. The task force is just like, "Oh man, there's another Kira. He's trying to sell the Death Note," and they're trying to see how much. Okay, who's going to buy it? It's very contentious of like which country is going to try to buy it, which people are going to try to buy it, and then it becomes an issue of, well, is getting to an astronomical point where it's no longer an individual trying to buy it. For sure, these have got to be a country coming together to buy this. At the end of the auction, for I think it's four like quadrillion dollars or something like that, or maybe it's like 1 quadrillion. I forget. It's an insane amount of money, but that money is the U.S. The U.S. buys it, and Minoru then says, "All right, Ryuk, go ahead and take this to the president of the United States." Before this happens, one of the other Shinigami show up and talk to Ryuk, and they're like, "Hey, man, Shinigami King needs to see you." And Ryuk's like, "Ah, damn it. Okay, fine. All right." So he goes to see the Shinigami King. He comes back, and he goes to the United States president, and he's like, "Hey, man, I have this Death Note. By the way, before you touch this, if you touch it, you take control of it, and you die. There's a new rule in it." He shows him the rule. It says anyone who tries to buy or sell the Death Note will die among the transaction being completed. So that's just kind of what happens. And so the United States president at the time, he's like, "Oh shit." And Ryuk's like, "Yep. So either you take it and you die, but someone in your country will get it because it will fall right here. It will fall on the floor. Someone can pick it up and use this shit." He said, "Or you don't take it, you live. That's that, but you don't get the money back, right?" And remember, the United States government just spent like $250,000,000. They spent an insane amount of money. And so the president's just like, "No, I don't want it." And so Ryuk's like, "Oh, crazy. You value your life over your country." And he says, "I'm going to say I got the pure Kira power, and I'm just going to say I'm not going to use it, and people will think I'm a saint." And Ryuk's like, "I like how you think." Now, because of this, because Minoru did sell it, he does end up dying anyway. Ryuk writes his name right under Light Yagami's. What's a little callback? Let me see if I can show you this manga page. Hopefully, they don't get me. If it even shows up, it doesn't show up, but they do put it. It's right under Light Yagami. Obviously, the end of Death Note, Ryuk ends up having to kill Light. Not having to, he does kill Light. And that's kind of the ending there. And I thought that was very interesting. And while I think Minoru is insanely cool, and the fact he died kind of sucks. I don't. Here's what comes into this, right? Who is the smartest Death Note user? A lot of people do say it's Light. Now, obviously, out of all the Death Note users we have the two Kiras I just mentioned previously, which I put on the lower end. I think Misa's better than them. I think was it Higumi? Yeah, I think it's Higumi is better. I think Misa's better than Higumi also. And then you have like Light, and Light's pretty. He's really good with the Death Note. I mean, the whole story is about Light using the Death Note to his advantage, right? And I think that's really good. But then we get to Toro, and I think Toro's very interesting because Toro actually gets access to the Death Note at a very young age. At the start of the story, it starts with Ryuk looking for his Death Note. He's dropped it again, and eventually Toro finds it on the ground. Now, Toro is a person that gets bullied at school, and he actually writes diaries about his day. So every day he writes a diary update. In his diary update, he mentioned the people who bullied him. Right now, here's the thing that I was thinking of because I actually forget this is a rule. You can write your own name in a Death Note, although it's not recommended, and you will not die. The reason it's not recommended is because I believe if you relinquish the control of the Death Note to someone else, you will die at that point because there is a finite amount of space in the Death Note. Of course, you can always request a new one from your Shinigami, but there is a finite amount of space in your Death Note. Regardless, he writes his things every day. And he ends up accidentally killing about five kids in his school because he got bullied by two. They die. He got bullied by three more. He writes their names. They die. He doesn't understand it yet. He's confused. Ryuk shows up and tells him like basically, hey, every time you write someone's name in this book, they're gonna die, man. Okay, that's just how it is. Then there's these two detectives who are going around and they're questioning the kids. They're trying to figure the stuff out. And then it's shown that Ryuk actually has two death notes because after he lost his other one, he went to the Shinigami King to get a second one, which is also pretty interesting. Because I didn't think you could have multiple, I guess because it wasn't shown before. But yeah, you can have two death notes for one Shinigami, which is pretty interesting. That becomes very relevant in a minute. Um, but then Ryuk's like, "Hey man, if you're really this choked up about killing people, use this. It's called the Death Eraser. It basically and there's a eraser specific for the Death Note. And when you use it on the Death Note, it will erase the names, and those people will come back to life, which is crazy. And this is why this is the most. I don't know if this is canon out of the most out of all three of these because of the fact that there's a Death Eraser and the idea of there being a Death Eraser is so cool and so interesting because if we were to add the Death Eraser into the main story of Death Note, and maybe I'll sit down and try to like finite how that would work. That would be so interesting and how it would change the story and how like Light could have used that in multiple ways to fuck with people. Very very interesting, right? Regardless, he then chooses to show him the Death Eraser. So the kid erases all the bullies, and because he erases all the bullies' names, they come back to life and they're at school the next day. Now the two people who are patrolling, they come to the school and they're like interviewing the five kids. They want to talk to them about like these five kids were dead yesterday. Now these five kids aren't. That's wild. One second. Ooh. Okay, so those kids, five kids were dead yesterday and they're no longer dead. What is it? So they're in the classroom, and in the classroom, they basically they all seven of them drop dead. The five kids as well as the two detectives. And obviously Toro, he's freaking out. He's like, "What the heck? My Death Note's at home." And Ryuk's like, "You sure you didn't kill him?" He's like, "No, my Death Note's at home." Then they're talking about it on the news, and another person dies, and he's like, "I'm not touching my Death Note, Ryuk. Did you drop another Death Note?" And Ryuk's just like, he looks down, he's like, "Guess I did." Ryuk, he doesn't care. So he's like, "Yep, guess I did." And then he thinks about it. And he said, "Who would have been the people to kill this other guy?" Then he thinks about the other kid that gets bullied. So he runs over to his house and he stops him right before writing the name in it. And he's like, "Hey man, I understand how your book works. It's okay. Just erase the names here. We'll erase it. They won't be dead anymore." So the two detectives come back to life, and the two kids they basically go to the detectives agency to talk to them, and they're like, "Hey, I can tell you how this book works." They show him the other kid's Death Note. They're like, "Listen, this is how the Death Note works. You can put names in it," and he practically uses it on himself. He basically just like, "Hey, write my name down," then erase it. So the main character Taro, he dies for a second, comes back. He's like, "This is how the Death Note works." So the two detectives end up burning the Death Note, which is really interesting. And there's a time skip, right? Now, it's a 7 year time skip, and it's shown that they're doing stuff like they're sharing, like they're having Death Note merch because it was just revealed how the Death Note worked kind of out in the public, but they're having like merch, like, "Oh, you can buy this notebook. It's just a normal notebook, but oh, you can pretend it's a Death Note." Kind of like how we buy fake Death Notes in real life. They have it now in there, and we didn't notice that Ryuk is still following Toro because remember when he Ryuk had two Death Notes, and when they went to the police, Taro didn't take his Death Note. He took the other kid's Death Note to him. And he said, "Here you go." So when they burned the Death Note, they burnt the other kid's Death Note. Meaning that Taro still has his Death Note. And it's hinted that he's still been killing people with his Death Note, which is actually insane. And I just love that. And I don't know, man, it's stuff like this that makes the series so interesting because you can kind of do whatever with the Death Note. And I think that's why it's so good. Because I remember it was the special one shot that came out in 2020. That was that one was the Akira stuff, right? Where it's like even as recent as what 5 years ago, just oh my god, 5 years, 5 years ago at this point. Um, oh my god, we can still get Death Note content that's interesting because the Shinigami King enacted that new rule of if this is being bought or sold, then those people die. That's so interesting too because it just builds on the fact that more rules can be added to the Death Note. Because if you remember, um, Light had Rim add two fake rules into her Death Note, which was the 13-day rule and the power being passed on rule, if I'm not mistaken. I forget what the other rule was, but I know one of them was the if this user doesn't kill it in 13 days, they will die rule. Oh yeah, and then if a piece is torn out, it doesn't work or something. I think those were the two rules that Light gave Rem to put in the Death Note, and that's how he ultimately ended up defeating L was because of those rules. Um, and the fact that there actually can be additions to the rules because it's kind of hinted that the rules have kind of been the same for a very long time, but now we know the Shinigami King can, in fact, actually affect the rules. I think it's very interesting. Now, there's one more thing I do want to touch on. Allegedly, there is an alternate ending where like Light lives to be like older because he ends up beating like near Mellow. Uh, I don't know where that is because it's not in the mangas, and it's not like an anime only ending. So I'm gonna see if I can find it. I don't think it's any of the light novel stuff too. I know just like L changed the world. That's different. But that's like if L would have beaten Light and stuff like that. But I don't know if I can find that ending. It'd be very interesting. I've heard it's like he challenges the Shinigami King or whatever. That's kind of cool. I know there's also like an OVA in which Ryuk's retelling the story of Death Note to a Shinigami that looks a lot like Light, and just kind of hinted that Light would have been like became a Shinigami. And I think that's also interesting. I think that's a cool concept, although not canon. I think that's a very cool concept of like, oh, if you use the Death Note and you also die because of your name being written in the Death Note by a Shinigami, then you become a Shinigami. That'd be interesting because it's like, how do we get more Shinigamis? I don't know. It's just stuff like that. It's very interesting to learn about. Regardless, if you're a fan of Death Note, that's cool. Let me know what's your favorite part of Death Note. What's your favorite big brain moment? I think mine it's still the Ray Penfer stuff, and then when he tricks Naomi into like, uh, trick Naomi, he may he ends up defeating Naomi. I think that's my favorite part because it shows how quick on his feet Light is. He went from oh yeah, you should leave the thing to like oh yeah, and he eventually convinces her to be like oh yeah, you can join the task force. I just need your name. I work with L. You want to work with L again? You like L, right? He does that. I just Light's an interesting character. L's an interesting character. I did all these characters in Death Note are very interesting. I think even like the dumb ones, like what's his name? Oh, the guy in the task force, the fucking idiot. Oh no, you guys know who I'm talking about? The one that went into the bank building and got caught. What is his name? No, I'm gonna have to look for this real quick. No, but he's very interesting. Because it's like he starts off as like the dumbest character in the task force, and eventually just becomes like kind of a key point, like a key player. Like it's kind of the only reason that Nier ends up winning is kind of because of him. Is because he just learns to take initiative and stuff. And I think that's very interesting. And just some good characters, man. Yeah, Matsuda, that's his name. Okay, yeah, but Matsuda he's pretty great. He's one of my favorites, especially because they kept calling him stupid to his face, and they just act like he wouldn't understand it. Anyway, I've been yapping long enough. If you like Death Note, let me know down below. If you watch the Death Note Japanese live action movies, let me know. If you watch the Netflix Death Note, let me know. I think those movies are very funny. I think they're also pretty good if you don't look at them in the lens of a manga slash anime Death Note fan. You look at them in the lens of like the general idea of Death Note. I think those three movies get the point across. But yeah, let me know if there's any other classic mangas because this is like I consider this a classic. This is a certified anime classic, right? There's any other classic mangas that you guys enjoyed? At some point, I plan on doing a reread of Monster. I watched the anime a long time ago, but I think I'm gonna just read it this time, and I expect to do a review on that. So that would be interesting. But if you have anything else you'd like me to read a review, I'm down. I like most genres of stuff, so I'm not reading Fire Punch. Anyway, thank you for letting me waste your time, and don't read Fire Punch. Thank you.